Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Barrow. I'm the Chief of Staff at Winning for Women PAC. First off, a big thanks to all of our members who are joining from all around the country. We're really glad to have you with us. And a special thank you to RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel for teaming up with us for this important discussion. Today, we're really excited to be joined by some of the leading female voices in Congress to discuss the Biden administration's refusal to reopen schools and really how it's disproportionately impacting women in the workforce. Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, along with Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa, Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina, and Oklahoma Congresswoman Stephanie Bice are not just in Washington to fight back against the Biden administration's dangerous policies, they're also working moms and, like me, understand firsthand how hard this pandemic has been on women in this country. Senator, Congresswomen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Of your time and really how much you're advocating for working women. So I know we're eager to get started. And with that, Chairwoman, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Danielle. Thank you for the introduction. Hey, everyone. I'm so excited to see you. I'm sorry we're running a little late, but you know, women, we can multitask, and we have some phenomenal women in Congress who are doing some votes on the House floor and then rushed over here to join this really important chat. And it is so pertinent to what we're all going through today, as all of us are mothers on this call, and we know how hard it has been for mothers across this country and families across this country to see the devastating effects on our children's education and in our communities, to continue to have our schools closed during this global pandemic. So we're going to start a great discussion. I want to introduce again our great guests. Senator Joni Ernst, if you can wave when I say your name. Congresswoman Stephanie Bice, Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, and Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who I don't see here yet, but will be joining us. So we're just gonna have a great discussion. If you don't mind, ladies, I'm gonna call you by your first name because we're all moms. But of course, we all appreciate that you are elected Congress members and a senator, and you are amazing, powerful women that we are so lucky to have in office. So let's get started. And the first question I have for all of you is, how has this pandemic as moms affected each of you on a personal level, and some of the challenges that you have faced personally during this time? And Joni, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Ashley and Stephanie.
Thank you so much. First, thanks to Winning for Women for this wonderful event, and Ronna for hosting today. And it's great to see Stephanie and Ashley. I actually got into Iowa late last night. I rolled in here in Red Oak, Iowa about midnight, but we still see the effects of the pandemic all across Iowa. And I am a mom. My daughter now is in college, though. But what we saw, of course, over the summer, her institution shut down. So she was doing her classwork from home, virtual learning. And I was working from home as well. They sent all members of Congress back to their home states. And so we had people coming and going here at the house, just trying to figure out Zooms and different ways of learning and working. But it has been so difficult because my neighbors, just right here in my neighborhood, people I've grown up with, one mom, she expressed extreme frustration because she has 3 elementary age children, and there was no daycare. Daycares were shutting down as well. They didn't have as many members, COVID restrictions. And she told me one time she was so frustrated, just on the verge of tears. And she said, Joni, she was an essential worker, so she had to go to work. So did her husband. And she said, I feel like such a failure as a mother, because my children are at home trying to do virtual learning. I get off work at night, I'm exhausted, and I can barely help my kids with their homework. And she said, I'm failing right now. And I had to reiterate, you're not failing. This is unprecedented times. But what we know now with the science is we can open schools, and we should do that. My daughter is back at college. So thankfully she's engaging in that, but we still have many children across the country that are not in school. We've got to reopen those doors get them back so they can be educated, stabilize their mental health, and of course, get those working moms and dads back into the job force.
Thanks, Joni. I so appreciate that. And you just highlighted why we need to have this discussion, because families all over this country are suffering right now and it's not being talked about enough. So thank you. Stephanie, what's it been like for you?
Well, I'm in a similar situation as Joni. I have older daughters, one in high school, one in college. And, it was really challenging with my oldest, because she was our first freshman year at Oklahoma State University and came home for spring break to enjoy the week with family, and then never went back. And was home for the entire summer. So 5 months of a 19-year-old being at home with mom and dad is not ideal, certainly. So, we were really happy to hear that the college decided to go back. Unfortunately, most of the classes have been virtual, and she's an engineering major doing mechanical and aerospace. And these are collaborative classes where students should be working together. They weren't. And to give you an example of the impact on students, at one point she called me and she said, "Mom, I'm having a really tough time. This is not easy. I think I need to talk to somebody about it." And I was really, I felt blessed that she was able to share that with me. We called the counseling services on campus, and it was a 2-month wait to get an appointment for her to talk to someone. So I think the universities are even overwhelmed in trying to help students really, work through this challenging time. On the flip side, my youngest daughter, who is a junior in high school, they attend a private Catholic school, and they decided that they were going to be in person. So they put very strict protocols in place, talked about making sure that if the child was primarily exposed, that they were to stay home for 10 days. And I will tell you that there was only 1 week in the last 6 months where they decided to close the school because they had a large number of students that were primarily exposed or had COVID. But they've been very thoughtful in their approach, and these kids need to be in school. And so I advocate for that at every opportunity to make sure that we understand that this is good for kids' mental health too.
Thank you so much. And I love that you're talking about the schools that are getting it done.
Yeah.
But it is the private schools and the charter schools and the kids in public school, the disparity we're going to have is going to be long-term. So we'll talk about
And
that
Ronna,
a little later.
I would add too, before I was elected to Congress, I served in the Oklahoma State Senate, and I had moms and dads emailing me saying, and I think Ashley probably had the same, what am I going to do as a essential healthcare worker? I need to be working, but my kids aren't in school. How am I going to make this work? And so then they asked the follow-up question, can I send my kids to a private school instead? And so it's really shifted the conversation to the school choice discussion.
Exactly. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I think that's going to be a real centerpiece of coming out of this and opening the eyes of many parents as to why school choice is so important, because private schools and charter schools are getting it done and public schools aren't because of the unions. Ashley, what about you?
Yeah, well, Ronna, I've had the same experience as many of my fellow women colleagues. Boy, 2020 was a tough year. Running a campaign, a very intense congressional campaign with 2 little ones. Mine are 8 and 10. My oldest just turned 10 yesterday, so happy belated birthday to Max.
Happy birthday.
So add that to the additional challenges of serving in office. I missed my son's birthday yesterday, but I'm hopeful I'll get home to wish him a happy birthday in person. But boy, it was just so challenging, and we struggled as parents trying to provide that supplemental education. I'm not a teacher. I mean, I'm trying hard to make sure my kids are getting what they need at home. We're lucky that they are back in school, but boy, we faced some headaches along the way. Eastern Iowa, the state of Iowa experienced a major natural disaster along the way too, in addition to the pandemic. So we had the derecho storm. So many of our school buildings were damaged. So when they did actually make the decision to go back and try to reopen, then you had that on top of it. My family's had to quarantine. I've had COVID. My kids have had to have their classes quarantined. It's not the same when they're learning from behind a computer. And I think the point I would make too is I've talked to not only other parents, but other teachers, and teachers are frustrated by this too. They want to be in the classroom teaching their students. It's frustrating to them, and you can hear it in their voices when they're teaching virtually. It's not the same. And so it's been such a trying year, and we're lucky that our kids were able to get on the bus this morning and go to school, and they're in a classroom right now learning in Iowa. But that took a lot of effort. People had to take a stand and make sure that it was really important that we got our kids back to school, and not every state is doing that, and that's unfortunate.
Mhm.
Well, I'm really jealous right now because my 15-year-old's in his bed. I'm hoping he's fully dressed doing his virtual school right now, but I'm waiting for the day he can go back to school. I don't think he's as passionate about it as I am, but that's a different story. So we're going to talk about a couple things, and there's two sides of this that I think are important. One, obviously, the impact on our kids, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but there has been an enormous impact on women that has not been discussed in the national media. And Time Magazine called it a she session because 2.4 million women have dropped out of the workforce since this pandemic began. Like Joni talked about her neighbor with the daycare issues, women are taking the brunt of this. And just last month, 140,000 women lost their jobs. So Stephanie, I wanted to ask you, what impact are you seeing as a Congress member, as a member of your community, that this is having on our community, on our economy, on families, and on our communities, this she session?
I think it's having a huge impact. And what I don't think people are really recognizing is not only are women having to exit the workforce to be able to take care of children and try to be, teacher to their kids, but we're also putting women at a significant disadvantage long term because they're exiting the workforce for we don't know how long. They're going to have to start over in some cases, or, we don't know what the job market's going to be like in a year. And so their earning potential has been impacted by what's happening right now. And I think that we need to be really mindful of that, and not only getting our kids back in school, but making sure that we're helping these women that have incredible skills and talent find opportunities to continue on that career path.
Thank you. And Joni, thanks for all you do. I know you're championing this, and you've made COVID-19 a huge centerpiece of your time in the Senate, but you have also been on the front lines fighting for access to childcare and supporting the Child Care Workforce and Facilities Act to expand competitive grants in states like Iowa to increase access to licensed child care centers. Can you talk about this initiative and what it would mean for moms right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And the conversation today is so critical to what's going on in our society right now, as we see moms that are being excluded from the workforce because of the pandemic, because of large in part schools aren't open, and lack of childcare. So with this initiative, it's actually a bipartisan solution for our women in order to get them back to work. But it is bipartisan. It's also co-sponsored by my friends Amy Klobuchar and Dan Sullivan of Alaska. Amy, a Democrat, Dan, a Republican. We have many others that are joining us in this initiative, but what it would do is provide a pot of money, and we're proposing $100 million of grant dollars, 50% grant matching funds to expand facilities or assist in paying for those childcare workers, their training activities. So those dollars can be used in a number of ways, but we really need to keep our childcare centers open. And so once we can get those doors open, provide greater access and seats for children, then we'll have those moms going back to work. And Stephanie is right that our women have been impacted so much more by this pandemic than men because they are the primary caregivers of our children.
Thanks, Joni. And I just appreciate you doing that and taking that on. Ashley, we all know that women-owned businesses, which had been on the rise in recent years, really booming, have been especially hit hard through the pandemic. More than half of female-owned businesses are going to probably have to permanently close. What can we do from a government perspective, but also a community-based perspective to help these businesses that are so crucial to our local economies and also support women?
Well, I think the best thing, Ronna, every state needs to reopen, and that's what we need to be doing. Is we need to be able to provide that opportunity to people. I was watching the news the other day and hearing from a woman struggling in California. She's been shut down, and they have no sign of reopening yet for her. And that's, to me, that's heartbreaking. And we do need to be providing that opportunity so that they can. Their communities want it. I mean, their governor's being recalled in California because of this. I mean, it's having that real world impact down to the family level. And you're right, women are especially impacted by this. So I think from a government perspective, when I look at COVID-19 relief packages like what we're debating today in the floor, it misses the mark, because we want that relief to go to help people. PPP program has been incredibly important to helping our businesses actually stay afloat and stay in operation. But it doesn't do them any help when we're possibly going to have to vote on tax increases to pay for all this. I mean, that's another burden that they're going to face in trying to get up and running again. So we need to be really targeted in the relief we're providing. But ultimately, what it comes down to is that opportunity comes from being able to be open. And that's what we really need.
I think that is so key. People ask me right now, what does the Republican Party stand for? And we are for opening our businesses, opening our economies, and we are for opening our schools. And those are two things that I think every American right now really needs to hear from our party. And we just got joined by Nancy Mace, our wonderful Congresswoman from South Carolina. Hello, Nancy. Thank you for joining the conversation.
Nancy.
I'm going to put the next question to you.
Okay. Good morning.
We talked a lot about women and the effect this is having on women, but now I want to talk about kids. But I think you embody both. As a single mom with 2 kids, what has it been like for you to balance being a working mother and also helping your kids learn during this really challenging environment?
It's been hell, I'll be honest with you. It's terrible. They're at school. I mean, they do virtual school at my house every day. And so all they do is see me work. And one of the things, for us, it's been a mental challenge, emotional challenge, physical challenge, because our children are not as active. They sit behind a computer all day. They're not getting outside doing much PE unless they do sports. And if you look at recreational sports, they're not doing as many practices or as many games. And so one bad thing begets another. And I have 2 kids. I'm a single mom, but I have one kid who's taken to virtual school and doing exceptional. And then I have another child who is exceptionally gifted and talented and just cannot manage, whether that's doing homework or organizing, managing the work. And we really are struggling. And then the other thing is that, I don't know, my kids are a little bit older. They're more independent. If you have elementary school kids, the cost of childcare while you work from home, so your kids get educated at home, they're going to be, it's a tremendous expense because they can't go back to school. And you look at the science, and the science says, hey, they're safe, and school might even be safer at school than being at home for many children. And they can get their nutrition there, they can get the education, get internet, all the things that they need at very minimal risk if parents so choose to do that. But one of the emotional tolls for me being a mom is my kids think that my work is more important than them now. Because before, when they were in school all day, they didn't see me work all day. They saw me drop them off at school, pick them up, do a little bit of work at night, but be able to really pay attention to them when they were home. But now you can't give them, as a parent, a working parent, attention all day. It's not going to work. So they're on their own, and they feel like they play second fiddle. And I can only imagine that's how most kids feel. And there are other parents that are struggling with that and going through that with their kids. And so I feel that pain. It's personal, and I feel it every day.
Nancy, Johnny, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just with Nancy talking about, the children and the needs that go unmet if they're not in school for a number of families. I think about my nephews as well. I do have one nephew that's in elementary, and he has special needs. And so he does have additional requirements. He's autistic. And when he's at home, competing for the attentions of mom and dad with an older brother who also needs to work on school, it's just very, very challenging for those parents. And thankfully, as Ashley mentioned, here in Iowa, our wonderful Governor Kim Reynolds has opened the schools. And so we've had them back in school since August. And I'm so grateful because the attention that my nephew needed to get to help him in his educational activities, they weren't being met at home, or to the detriment of his older brother. So it's really great that we've been able to get kids back into school for the most part here in Iowa, but we just don't see that across the country. And I think about all those kids that do need a little extra attention and they're just not receiving it.
And Ronna, if
Totally.
I,
And Ashley, you introduced the Reopen the Schools Act to hold the government accountable by rewarding schools that are following the roadmap to get kids back into school safely, and Democrats continue to block this. Can you tell us more about this legislation?
Yeah, it's really about accountability and putting kids first, Ronna. And Congress appropriated already, and Joni supported that $54 billion to go to schools with the intention of reopening. And that's a bipartisan effort. We want our schools to reopen, but there's just no accountability there, and we're not seeing that follow through. So what my bill does is it conditions the money on actually opening the schools like they should be. They should be having a 50% in-person option for at least half the students. And so all we're asking is that if they want the 2/3 of the money, the remaining 2/3 of the money, they need to actually have a plan to reopen, present that to their governor, and then follow through and execute on that plan. And so we know it's possible. I talked to several of our superintendents last week who said, hey, we got the money last year. We've been able, thank you so much. We've been able to reopen. Things are going great. They've seen their numbers come down, and they are stopping the community spread. And they're doing it through the proper channels, the PPP or the PPE, social distancing, and lots of cleaning. So it's possible, and we know it. And it's unfortunate that the Democrats keep blocking this because they're making kids a political football as they continue to move the game posts further back on this agenda. And so the kids are the ones who are losing out here. And I think it's unfortunate, kids and taxpayers. I mean, let's be honest, this is a lot of money. And there's 130 billion more in this new package that we're going to be working on here soon. So it's really a disservice to our kids that this money is out there and is not being used to reopen schools in the way it should.
and I would add that we haven't even spent all of the money that was appropriated this last time, right? So there's not a need at this point for actually putting this forward. And until we have a plan and a need, I think it's a little premature. I also want to take a step back though, Ronna, and kind of piggyback off of what Joni mentioned, and that is these kids that they really need to be in school. And when I say need, I mean, you're talking about low-income families that they rely on free and reduced lunch, they rely on free breakfast. In some cases, they live in an environment, home environment, where you have mental health and substance abuse issues at home. School is a safe haven for these kids. My sister-in-law taught at a 99% free and reduced lunch school right out of college. And I got a real up close and personal view of these children that really struggle. And so there are so many reasons why we should have kids in school. And I think that's one piece of it that really hasn't been talked about, is the fact that there is a psychological and emotional toll, and in some cases physical toll, on these children that are stuck at home.
I think that's so true. And Nancy, I've noticed a lot of your tweets on this, talking about the increase in suicide rates, the increase in mental health issues. I think it is very alarming to see this mantra of follow the science. And we understand that the CDC is saying our kids can get back to school safely, but there is another science of the mental health and the emotional effects that this is taking on our kids. And you've seen in San Francisco, the city has sued its own school board to reopen the schools because of the high suicide rates that are being cited among children. So Nancy, I think you have been probably, in my mind, and maybe all of you have, but I've been seeing you on Twitter the most vocal about this, the mental health issue. What do you think about this and the effect that this is having on our kids' mental health?
Well, it's personal. I mean, I see it with my own children, but then when you look at the statistics, the number of high schoolers, it's up 31% of teenagers that go to the ER for mental health emergencies. The same thing, children who are in elementary school, we're seeing that as well. We're seeing obesity numbers go up, suicides go up. We're seeing a 600% increase in academic failure. And I dropped out of high school. So these things for me, they're really personal, because in my district and in many places, at least in my state, the difference between rich and poor is literally black and white. And you're seeing the gap between the rich and poor and the educated and uneducated widen. And follow the science is only okay if you have a D beside your name. But when you look at the statistics, I know in my own district, the rate of COVID with students who are in school physically 5 days a week, it's 0.5% up to 0.9%. They're safer at school when there are safety and health precautions put in place, and many times being at home. And my kids just got to go back 2 days a week. About 2 weeks ago, they started, and they're learning how to stay clean. They're making them wash their hands. These are good things. They're learning how to clean their desks, and then they can distantly interact with other students. They are in a much better place mentally right now, just on going back 2 days a week. They want to go back 5. I'm okay with a hybrid. I would like 4 days a week. I mean, 3 or 4. 2 is not enough for me. When there's some families that don't want their children back, and that's okay. But there are many of us that are struggling to deal with the emotional toll that we see in our children, the educational lack of education in our children, and for parents that don't have support. I have family and friends that live nearby, and so I have a lot more support than many families. But if you don't, you're working 2 jobs and you're divorced and you've got kids in elementary school, I don't know how you do it. I just don't know how. And these policies of the left are putting our children back. You know, the Biden administration wants to talk about lifting people up out of poverty. Well, this COVID-19 package is going to make the gap between rich and poor, educated and uneducated, worse in this country. And so I do want to talk about the science, but I have an R by my name, so I'm not allowed to.
Exactly. And you know that, and I think,
Right.
Stephanie, you hit on this too, which is there is a disparity in the schools, and you have seen schools that don't have access to computers or the internet, are completely cut off from teachers, and the drop off in enrollment in these schools is so high. And you're right, like the disparity between the kids that are able to go back to school and these kids who are being left behind is going to be massive, and it's going to have a long-term effect. How do we remedy this disparity in access to education in light of the pandemic, Stephanie?
Well, I think to Ashley's point, first of all, you got to push for these schools to get back open immediately. But then I think you're going to see a big push for school choice coming up in the future. You know, in my home state, this has been a debate for quite some time. And even in my previous Senate district, there were a lot of parents that were really not favoring that, because they were in a really good school, a really good district. They felt like things were going well until that school district said, no, we're not reopening, or we're only reopening 2 days a week. And then the parents said, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Other schools are opening 5 days. Why are you choosing this path? And then they became sort of aware of, you know what, maybe this school choice conversation does need to happen. And I think that you'll see that across the country, because parents recognize that, you know, what's best for one student isn't necessarily great for everyone. And parents want options.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. I think one of the things that you talked about earlier too, and Joni, I'm going to ask you about this, is there's $63 billion that has already been allocated to help the schools open that has not been spent. Yet you guys are facing this $1.9 trillion spending bill, and only $6 billion of that would go towards opening the schools this year. So Joni, like, this is crazy. How do we get this out? Because
it's crazy.
The money's there, and now we're going to put 1.9 trillion in for like what? It's not even going to help open the schools. So can you talk about this? Because this is what people don't get about government.
Exactly. So I am astounded at the statistics that we see being promoted by many media outlets out there about how many Americans support this $1.9 trillion package. But the problem is only 2/3 of Americans actually know what's in the bill. So if we told them that there are hundreds of billions of dollars going to arts and entertainment, going to bail out bad behavior of cities and states. My Iowa taxpayers, we passed a status quo budget in the Iowa legislature. Our cash reserves are full. Most states saw a very, very insignificant decrease in revenues. So we don't need to bail everyone out. Those dollars that are going to education, only a small percentage of that will actually be spent in this year. The rest of the dollars go to outlying years well into the future. And so it's not really focused on COVID-19. And I actually sat on the plane coming back from Washington, D.C. I did a stop through Atlanta. There was a gentleman who was sitting in the seat next to me coming into Omaha, Nebraska. He was a teacher and he was actually coming to Iowa. He's an expert in virtual learning, and he was going to go help one of our school districts set up this, that, or the other. But he said that the state that I come from, he said, there is no way we can get all of this money spent. He said, there is so much money being poured into education right now, but we just don't have anywhere to spend it. So it's great. You know, they're doing the cleaning. They've got enough funds to do the cleaning and some of these other virtual learning activities. But what we're doing is pouring more money into a system that hasn't spent what we allocated from December and from the CARES Act. And so, you know, I wish our American population would just take a really hard look at what they're debating in the House right now with that $1.9 trillion. And it makes me wonder if we would separate the issue of, you know, economic stimulus checks, if we would pull that out of this particular bill, would people be as supportive of $1.9 trillion? So I think people just need to understand that the package itself includes so much that is not going to help us right now. It's just a liberal leftist elite wish list. And we should not be doing this, because what we're doing, we're throwing that burden on our children, and we should not be doing this.
Any other thoughts on the 1.9 trillion? I'm sure you all have them.
There's a lot of thoughts.
And I'm on the budget committee, and I can tell you, we didn't get an opportunity to make changes to this bill. And I think that's really what's unfortunate here is, you know, our voice was dampened, and we weren't able to make any suggestions here, because I think this could have been a bipartisan bill if we were able to work together and make these changes and focus on a bill that was really about relief. But I also serve on appropriations. So I'm on budget and appropriations, and this is an appropriations bill. It's a spending bill. And so they're using this budget reconciliation process because they know they can't get the votes that they need in the Senate otherwise, right, Joni? And
yes,
it's unfortunate that they did it this way, because we do need to be focused on the relief that people need and not all of the other Washington fork spending, which is what this bill really is.
And I would add, I wholeheartedly agree with that. You know, you talked about some of the things in the bill. You have foreign aid. You have a tunnel in San Francisco. You have, you know, Schumer's highway. There's all of these things that have been put in there that to that point should have never been put in the bill. And the one thing I think is really important to know is that Republicans have had no input in this package. Mm-hmm. In every other relief package that has been put together for the last year, you know, Republicans have been able to negotiate with Democrats to come up with something that was reasonable and thoughtful. This has not been the case. We've basically been completely shut out and silenced in this process, and that's not the way it should work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and
you can't call
Nancy, do you have anything? Go ahead, Nancy.
Sorry, Ronna, you can't call it a COVID-19 relief package if only 1% of that money is being spent on vaccinations and less than 10% of it is being spent on any COVID relief whatsoever. It's not what it's not what this is.
Amen.
I love that point. You know, I'm so glad that Nancy Pelosi needs a tunnel to get her ice cream quicker to her luxury refrigerator. I mean, it's just, I don't know how that helps families. And the word bipartisan is so critical because this is affecting everyone across the political spectrum, the economic spectrum. It's a pandemic affecting everyone. And why can't we do this in a bipartisan way? So I'm going to end with a question that I think a lot of people ask me. And, you know, this is, I think it's personal to all of us. Nancy, thank you for sharing your stories. You know, my daughter is in school. She decided to go hybrid, which means she goes to school one day and then the next day she has nothing virtual at all. So she's literally getting half the school year. We actually made her get a job at the mall on the other days. So she started this week. But what do we tell parents in states like mine run by really liberal governors, not like Kim Reynolds or Ron DeSantis or Kristi Noem or these other great governors that have made the choice to open up their schools in their states? But what do you tell to moms and parents who are just stressed And it's not political. This is real. I don't wake up thinking I'm a Republican, I'm distressed. I'm a mom. This is so hard on our kids and our families. What can they do? How do they enact change? Who do they reach out to? What help can we provide people who are really struggling right now? And I'm going to ask all of you to answer that question. Joni, I'll start with you.
Absolutely, Ronna. And what we have to do is make their voices heard. And that's why having this discussion with the four of us, all members of Congress, all moms, all conservatives, we have to make their voices heard. And we can do that. We have a platform where we can take their voices to the American public. And so I would encourage all of those moms and all of those working families, all of those that are really concerned about opening our school doors, talk to your members of Congress, share your stories. And I know sometimes it's really hard to separate your heart and your head, but I'm telling you, the stories from the heart right now, that's what's going to move some of these Democratic members. They have to understand the mental challenges, as all of us have outlined today, the mental challenges, the physical challenges, the nutritional needs, all of that. We have to do the very best we can for our children. And that's not happening in a number of these states. So we have to be their mouthpiece and make sure they're being heard.
Thanks, Jen. Stephanie.
They need to develop a relationship with either their member of Congress or their state legislator. I think as a state legislator previously, Ashley and I were in that world, and it made a difference when you would get 15, 20, 30 phone calls from, constituents saying, why aren't schools open, or, emailing about a specific topic. And so developing relationships, not only in the state level, but then communicating with your members of Congress, because I think the more that we hear from moms, the more that we hear from families about the struggles that they're facing, the more that we can try to figure out how do we make this work for our constituents. I'm in a state, the great state of Oklahoma, where Kevin Stitt shut down the state for about 6 or 8 weeks. And then he said, we have to keep open. We have to keep businesses open. We've got to keep, schools open safely. And it's worked. I think you've seen our economy actually didn't take much of a hit. Unemployment right now is 3.9%. We have $1 billion surplus. So it's possible to keep people safe, but also keep schools open, keep businesses open. And that's really right now what has to be the focus in our communities. And your voice, reaching out to your elected officials and making sure your voice is heard, is the number one way to do that.
Yeah, I would say also, if you're watching this today and you need information, reach out to us, because you have to arm yourself with information so that when you're out talking to your friends, make some calls, I think, to your friends in your network, because that's really how we engage and amplify this message. Because unfortunately, I think there are some people who are digging in and they're not listening. And that's unfortunate, because the people who lose are the people who are most vulnerable, and our country is losing out right now. And so, if you want more information, sign up for all of our newsletters. We're trying to get the word out about what's really happening here, I would add, and why, like the context behind what's actually happening and why is so important. So arm yourself with that information so you can go out and be an advocate in your community too.
And Nancy.
Yes, and Ronna, you're correct. This is not a Republican versus Democrat issue. This is an American issue. This is about putting every child, regardless of your zip code, the color of your skin, your gender, your identity, whatever it is, this is an American issue. And you're willing to open the border, but not willing to open the schools. That's when your country has its priorities all mixed up. And I think it's really important for parents, moms and dads, to start at the local level on this issue too. So don't be shy about calling, texting, emailing your district education board member, or maybe that's your superintendent of your county and your school district, the principal of your school, being vocal at the local level, and then to your state house rep, your state senator, and going on up the chain to the governor, and then your members of Congress too. We can be a great voice and advocate, but many of these decisions too are also being made at the local level. And so it's really important that that you have a unique message also, not join like a letter writing campaign where it's all just canned and the same message. But if many parents with their own unique story, their own unique message, reaching out at the local level and trickling up, that is probably the fastest way we can enact some of these changes at the local level, is where I would start. Congress is a big place, and it's very messy right now, and it's very partisan and very challenging at times. So I would for sure start at the local level. And it's a way for us too to talk to people in our community, regardless of political affiliation. I mean, oftentimes you can't talk politics at the Thanksgiving dinner table or whatever, but this is an issue that really it should be politically blind essentially. And it's something that I hear from Democrats and Republicans on something that we can work together on at the local level.
Mhm.
So I appreciate you all, and thank you so much. I love this conversation, and I'm just going to add one other thing to our viewers is not just get involved with your local community and your PTA and telling your school board and everybody. My PTA, I think, is kind of a pain in the butt because I'm on the PTA meetings and I'm pretty vocal on Facebook, and but run for office. Look at putting yourself in a position where you can be a leader. And I know that might not make that change right now, but these women, what they do and their leadership, it's historic. We now have 38 Republican women in Congress, in the House. This is a new record. The highest we ever had before was 30. And it does take women stepping forward and groups like Winning for Women that support women. So thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for what you do. And I'm with you as a mom, just we're all together in this, and let's get through this and put our kids first. And let's not let unions or any government interests take over what we need to do for our children and our future. So thank you all, and I'll hand it back to Danielle. Thank you again to Winning for Women for hosting this great event.
Absolutely. Well said, Chairwoman. Couldn't have said it better myself. And really, thank you for joining. And Senator Ernst and Congresswoman Hinson, Bice, and Mace, really appreciate you being on, and really just appreciate all you're doing to lead on this issue in Congress. So with that, we will wrap things up. A big thank you to all of our members who are listening and watching in. Until next time.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.